perceptions. Did anyone notice anything missing from the building? Right here. There's the microphone is gone. That's right. How many of you noticed it before he got up there? Nobody. Isn't it amazing how it blurred in? I'll fix it, by the way. It's in that room back there. We removed it yesterday for Bill Feist's memorial service, and it didn't dawn on me until Ken walked up there that mic wasn't sitting there, and apparently none of you noticed it before. Well, you should have said something before then. I'd have fixed it for you. No, it's sitting in that room. I took it away for Bill's memorial service yesterday that was held here in the building, and it just literally did not. I walked past this spot, and I usually trip over it. You'd think I would have been the one to remember that it wasn't there, but I'll fix it up. We'll put it back out before worship starts this morning, and so I apologize to Ken. I should have noticed that sooner. Open your Bibles to Jeremiah chapter 27 is where we're going to find our study this morning. Jeremiah chapter 27. As we continue our study of this book and appreciating the things that Jeremiah is having to deal with, there's a lot of material within the book. As you recall, we talked about the fact that in terms of volume, it's the largest in terms of volume and of things said within it, words that we have in Scripture, and yet we're kind of getting to a point where much of the message is what? It's repeated, okay? And that's, and you wonder, well, why do that? Well, there's a simple reason. If you were telling your children to do something and they weren't doing it, what would you do? You'd tell them again, right? You would continue to repeat it. And God is continuing to repeat His message through Jeremiah. Because did Jeremiah walk in town one day, throw a message at them, leave town, and never to return? No. This is happening over what? A span of years, okay? A span of years, okay? I've been here in Payton City now for a little over 4 years. We started our 5th year together. That's hard to believe, but we started our 5th year together back in June. I guarantee you that in that 4-year span that I preached the same themes more than once. That I would come back to some thought, something we need to reconsider, something we need to refresh ourselves in. In a 4-year span, I guarantee you that there were subjects and thoughts and themes that we came back to and wanted to discuss again. And so the same thing's happening with the prophet. God's message really hasn't changed. What basically is it? They are doing what? They're not listening, and in their behavior, what are they doing? They're disobeying. Okay, what's rampant there? Idolatry. Okay, and with that idolatry came the shedding of innocent blood, which is a theme that keeps coming up within them. And so he basically hasn't changed his thought process. Your behavior is not right in the eyes of God. Sin has become common. Righteousness has become uncommon. You need to personally turn. If you personally want to be spared and have an opportunity, if you're fortunate enough, what's going to happen to you in this span of time? You're going to go into captivity. If you're fortunate enough, you'll just go into captivity. If you continue on certain paths, then God says, what's going to happen? Yeah, sword, pestilence, famine. Okay, greater challenges are going to occur. But the interesting kind of additional thought within this discussion, which happens again here in chapter 27, is this message for Judah alone? Or does Jeremiah have some things to tell some other folks? Yeah, there's others involved in this as well. God is going to use Babylon not just to judge and bring condemnation to Judah, but He's going to use Babylon in relationship to some other nations as well. And we kind of get that imagery here in chapter 27 of our study. So, get your lesson sheets out if you have them. I can also show it to you on the screen as we work together. But I want you to think about this initially. Messages to other nations, first part of this chapter. So there were a set of kings in places that God said to Jeremiah he needed to go talk to. Where were they? Okay, so Edom, Moab, what was the third one? Okay, those of Ammon are the Ammonites, Tyre, and generally you see those two almost always mentioned together, it seems like in Scripture. And so here are these other nations, these kings of these nations that are going to have to be dealt with. And I want you to notice with me, don't do that, throw that up there. Go to verse 3. So the message coming, he said there in verse 2, "Thus saith Jehovah to me, make thee bonds and bars and put them upon thy neck," implying what? Servitude, that's right. Implying servitude. So he says, I want you to give this imagery, this symbolic nature of that, and send them to the king of Edom, and to the kings of Moab, and to the king of the children of Ammon, and to the king of Tyre, and to the king of Sidon, by the hand of the messengers that come to Jerusalem, unto Zedekiah, king of Judah. And give them a charge unto their masters, saying, Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, thus shall you say unto your masters, I have made the earth, the men, and the beasts that are upon the face of the earth, by my great power and by my outstretched arm, and I give it unto whom it seemeth right unto me. What's the first part of the message, basically? That God is what? God's the creator, and because of that, He has what? All power. Okay? I want you to look around, and I want you to recognize that everything you see was created by Jehovah. You need to recognize that the same power that had the ability to create all that you know and see in the world is bringing that power to bear in judgment against you. And so don't think for a minute, I can't reach you. Don't think for a minute that I can't accomplish this. God is challenging them through the prophet and to recognize that He has absolute ability to reach them with His judgment. Were most men willing to believe that in that day? No, they felt that they were pretty much out of the reach of anyone in some senses. Many of them felt no vulnerability whatsoever. And so here's this challenge. Here's this message that comes from God. You tell them that the God of all things, men and beasts and all the earth, is bringing His power to bear upon them. And then He tells them what in verse 6? And now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and beasts of the field. Stop for a second. So he says to them, here's how I'm going to do it. So when you see Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon coming, what does he want them to have in their minds? Judgment of God, right? When they see Babylon coming, he wants them to know that that's not just Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon coming to wage war against them. That's God using Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon to bring judgment against them. And so they need to hesitate and think how they're going to react to this, because you're not just fighting Babylon. You're not just fighting another nation. You're going to be dealing with the condemnation that's coming from Jehovah. Go ahead, Roger. Yeah. God has been manipulating, if you will, for lack of a better word, or has been using these nations for His purposes and controlling things for a long period of time, so that things will happen in the timing that He desires. So, which is further illustration, as we look back on the history of it, further illustration of the kind of power He has and the kind of sovereignty He has, reign He has, I should say. Any other thoughts? Okay, so he says, and what are they going to have to do? At the end of verse 6. They're going to have to serve Nebuchadnezzar. You're going to become slaves, captives. You're going to become servants to Nebuchadnezzar. Is anybody going to like that message, by the way? You're going to be told that you're going to become a servant. You're going to become a slave to another. And not only just that, but to Babylon and the thought processes that they would have in relationship to that. But the warning comes out. I'm sending Babylon. They're going to be doing my bidding. And they're going to force you to have to consider the things that I'm challenging you in. So, as we looked at that section and go back to your worksheets, I want to give you a chance to answer these questions. What was then the message Jeremiah was to give, I should say? Okay, so God's the Creator, and He has power. What other elements did He say that we read through? Okay? You're going to become servants. Anything else that you noted? Right. And you'll see that more. We may not see it clearly yet in those verses, but you'll eventually see it more. And if God is the power behind this, and He says you're going to become servants, then it's futile to resist it. Why? Don't even attempt, because you may think in your mind that somehow you may have some success fighting against Nebuchadnezzar, but you're not fighting Nebuchadnezzar. You're fighting Jehovah. And so be careful how you think with concerning that. Read one more verse 7. And all the nations shall serve him and his son's son, until the time of his own land come. And then many nations and great kings shall make him their bondman. And it shall come to pass that the nation and the kingdom which will not serve the same Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation will I punish, saith Jehovah, with the sword and with the famine and with the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. But as for you, hearken ye not to your prophets, nor to your diviners, nor to your dreamers or dreams, nor to your soothsayers, nor to your sorcerers that speak unto you, saying, You shall not serve the king of Babylon. For they prophesy a lie unto you to remove you far from your land, and that I should drive you out, and you should perish. But the nation that shall bring their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, that nation will I let remain in their own land, saith Jehovah, and they shall till it and dwell therein. And so if you serve Babylon, okay, what's going to happen? You get a what? You get to stay home. Okay? And you get to farm your land. You get to live. Basically, you get to live like you've been living. Okay? You're going to be able to exist. You're not going to be driven out. You're going to have an opportunity to not have to leave your home and all those things. Just put yourself in servitude to Babylon. If you resist, what's going to happen? Yeah, okay, so then that's when the sword and the pestilence and the famine, okay, you choose to resist, and you'll find yourself in greater calamities and challenges than just having to serve the king of Babylon. And so it's a really odd message in some ways. Basically, he's telling them, accept it, and you'll have a better time through it. Resist it, and greater harm's coming. And so in their willingness, if they're willing, to submit to Babylon, who are they really submitting to? They're submitting to God. And that's basic principle has always been true. You submit to what God's will is, and the greater benefit comes. You resist what the will of God is, and challenge comes. And so that's the basic premise of the message here that he gives to them. You don't have any choice here. You don't have there's no ability for you to resist the challenges I'm bringing. There's no reason for you to attempt to try to escape this. Embrace it, live through it, and you get to stay at home until your land and produce a continuous life that you've already known. Resist, and trouble's coming. Trouble's coming. And all these kingdoms needed to understand that. We talked about that cup of fury in our prior studies, the judgment that God was bringing. He tells them to go tell them to drink the cup. There's not really any choice in the matter here. You embrace it and bring benefit, challenge it, and bring harm to you and your nation. Go ahead, Ed. Right. Right. Here's the thing. From an empire building mindset, it's not beneficial to Nebuchadnezzar to just go wipe everybody out. Because you wipe them all out, they can't do what for you? Can't serve you, okay? If you destroy them all, they can't serve you. If you don't give them an ability to do some kind of work or occupation, what can't they pay? They can't pay taxes, right? They can't contribute to the empire. And so Nebuchadnezzar's going to be far better off from an empire standpoint if he can simply put them in servitude. What God has given Nebuchadnezzar here is a tremendous opportunity to build his empire, because he's basically forcing these nations to come into servitude to him. And by so doing, Nebuchadnezzar is going to reap the benefits of it. Now, yes, they do come in and take many of the most precious items out of Jerusalem and carry them back to their capitals. But all in all, the greater good for the empire comes if you can just subdue the people and then have them begin to contribute to the purposes and causes of your empire. God tells them, serve, just serve, and live. Resist, and the sword's coming. And that's the option Nebuchadnezzar's basically going to give them. Any other thoughts about that first part of the chapter? All right, jump back in then. Come to verse 12. For visitors, by the way, we're trying to do this survey style. If it feels like I'm running 90 miles an hour, we're just kind of surveying these chapters. We cover about one a week, and two sometimes on Wednesdays. So I spoke to Zedekiah, king of Judah, according to all these words, saying, bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him and his people, and live. Tyre, Ammonites, Edom, Moab, all those, Sidon, they're being told the same thing that Zedekiah is being told. Okay, Judah and all of them are in the same boat. Serve Babylon or reap the repercussions of that. Why will you die, thou and thy people? Verse 13, by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence, as Jehovah has spoken concerning the nation that will not serve the king of Babylon. You're Judah, and so you're who in relationship to God? You're His country, right? You're God's people. And so this message comes down, and it comes to Tyre, and it comes to Sidon, and Edom, and Ammon, and all these other places. And what's your temptation to think? That God will bring that to them, but He won't. He'd never do that to us. We're His people. We can understand how He might let Babylon go down and take over Edom or the Moabites. You know, their mindset is that we are still under the great protection. But basically, Jeremiah reminds them yet again that you're not the exception here anymore. There's no exception to what's happening here. You must serve Babylon, or you'll reap the same consequence of sword and famine and pestilence that all those other nations are going to receive. It reminds us of a simple fact, that God's people really, in any point in time you want to talk about it, Old Testament times, New Testament times, God's people are only peculiar to Him while they're doing what? While they're obeying and serving Him. While they're honoring Him is when they're the peculiar people that He desires. Here was the nation that He had chosen, but He says, I'm not above bringing challenge to you. I'm not above bringing you into captivity, and I'm not above bringing a sword and famine and pestilence for those who resist the idea. You cannot assume the privileges of being in the nation or family or being a child of God. You cannot assume them. We cannot abuse them. We must honor that privilege by being the kind of people God wants us to be. And too often we almost get in the mindset that once I am part of that family, once I am part of that nation, that all is well and all will always be well. To me, the message of Jeremiah in part is that's not the case. Simply being at one point in time part of the family of God does not mean that He doesn't bring judgment and condemnation against it. So He's reminding them again here, you're under the same umbrella. You're under the same challenge. And so then He warns them not to listen to who? Yeah, there are going to be guys that are going to come and tell you something completely different. And hearken not unto the words of the prophets that speak unto you, saying, Ye shall not serve the king of Babylon, for they prophesy a lie unto you. For I have not sent them, saith Jehovah, but they prophesy falsely in my name, that I may drive you out, and that ye may perish, ye and the prophets that prophesy unto you. There's this weird kind of irony, if you will. God tells them, I don't have to bring sword and pestilence and famine and the challenges. I can be merciful. The problem is they're listening to who? They're listening to the wrong prophets. They're listening to the prophets who are coming and saying, we'll never be in captive to Babylon. This will never happen. These things will never occur. There's two ways. There's two ways to overcome evil. We can argue it from the consequence side. And we can talk about the idea that I don't want to suffer the consequence of doing that which is bad. Okay? When you're a child and you're growing up, generally that's the first way you learn about not doing what's bad, right? You don't do what's bad in your house because Dad's going to what? Well, nowadays I think they count to 10 and make you, I don't know what they do, jump a rope or something, whatever. But back in my day, right? Back when I was growing up, I mean, you've heard me talk about it. I break out in hives in that alley back there for anything I did in this building, and Dad just dragged me right out there in the alley. Discipline was coming. And in some form, and I don't, whatever discipline works is the discipline I'm for, by the way. But I want you to appreciate that nobody likes that moment. And so we reason from that idea. I don't want to do what's wrong because I don't want the consequences of it. I don't want to be grounded. Whatever it is. I don't want to reap the consequence. But the problem with only reasoning about evil from the consequence side is you can do what? You can tell yourself, there won't be any consequence. I can get away with this. I can do this and nobody will know. Or the consequence isn't real. It's not really going to happen. And so we can reason from the mindset of the consequences won't occur. And what happens is we talk ourselves into doing things that we never should do. Yeah. 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 Right. Well, and here's the thing. So if one side is you don't want to do what's bad because there's consequence coming, there's another side. What's that? I want to do what's right. Right? I want to do what's good. I want to do what's right. That's a better motivator. Okay? Because I can talk myself out of the consequences. I can convince myself I'm going to get away with something. I can convince myself that no harm's going to come. I can convince myself that Babylon can never come, this could never happen, Nebuchadnezzar's never going to make me captive. And I can probably find enough guys, and even some men who are prophets, supposedly, who are going to tell me the same. And so what I need to do is start reasoning from what is right. The better side of that, eventually, I would hope as a parent, and for lack of a better way to describe it, I think I would fail my children if the only thing they understood about doing wrong was you might get in trouble. If that's the only thing they understood about it, then I failed them. Because they need to understand that you do things that are right because they're right. You do good because you're supposed to do good. And you're supposed to behave, and you're supposed to do things that are right. And so impressing upon their minds the idea of reasoning from that which is right and good is what they lacked in Judah. They were reasoning everything from the sinful, evil side of it, and because of that, they were convincing themselves that nothing's ever going to happen to me. No consequence is going to occur. And Jeremiah keeps reminding them, you're listening to the wrong voices. They're telling you lies, and it's going to create problems for you. Yeah. Right. Right. And again, keep in mind that we're talking about over a span of time where they should be able to see the things that Jeremiah is saying to them and watching those very things unfold before them. And at some point in this process, you would have thought that would have clicked in their heads. And they would have said, I think I know the difference between who's telling me the truth and who's not telling me the truth. And the problem is that some folks want to believe a lie so badly that they'll blind themselves to the truth. They want to believe, for lack of a better term, in falsehood so much that they'll blind themselves to all the evidence really that's before them. And that's happening here in Judah. Well, nobody does, right? And I don't. But to be honest, none of us do. But you have to sometimes. You have to sometimes in order to make changes. So what was the message to your worksheets? Give you a chance to answer the questions. What was then the message to the king of Judah? All right. Same message, right? You need to serve as well. Don't think that because you're God's nation that somehow you're going to escape all these things. You need to serve Babylon as well. And also then he said, quit listening to all the wrong things. Quit listening to anybody that's telling you otherwise. You better be careful not to pay attention to that. Verse 16. Also I spoke to the priests and to all this people, saying, Thus saith Jehovah, Hearken not to the words of your prophets that prophesy unto you, saying, Behold, the vessels of Jehovah's house shall now shortly be brought again from Babylon, for they prophesy a lie unto you. Evidences, right, of things that are happening. Remember, this is period of time. As they come in, they take certain of the prized vessels and possessions of Jerusalem, and you would have thought that what would have been going on in the minds of everybody in Judah when that starts happening? Everything Jeremiah said is true, right? Okay, but so you talk about living in denial. So some of the most prized possessions have been taken back to Babylon. Okay, and what are they saying about it? They'll bring it back. Okay, they'll bring it back. I mean, they are just living in utter denial of what's going on. Because you can imagine, we don't have all the conversations here, right? We've got the recordings of Jeremiah the prophet, but you can almost hear this. Can you imagine? You've got this debate. Two guys are standing there trying to decide. Here's a prophet telling us that all's well. Here's Jeremiah telling us all that isn't well. And the one guy says, hey, we're going to be fine. We're God's people. There's nothing bad's going to happen. And this fellow says, well, look at everything they already took. Look at everything that's already gone. Are we going to deny and ignore the realities of what's happening among us? And you can just imagine in your own mind the kinds of conversations that had to have been going on in Jerusalem as people were trying to figure all these things out. And so if you've got evidence staring you in the face about the realities of what Babylon's bringing, you can either acknowledge them as true, or you can make up silly things like this. They'll bring it back. It's just a short time. They'll eventually bring it all back. And so Jeremiah says through God's message, Hearken not unto them. Serve the king of Babylon and live. Wherefore should this city become a desolation? Again, Nebuchadnezzar wants, from an empire standpoint, he wants a prosperous, in a very fertile region, among a very desert land. He wants the prosperity of that place. He doesn't. And yet they keep being warned. If you'll just accept the servitude, this place won't have to become desolate. But they're simply not listening. If they be prophets, and if the word of Jehovah be with them, let them now make intercession to Jehovah of hosts, that the vessels which are left in the house of Jehovah and in the house of the king of Judah and at Jerusalem go not to Babylon. For thus saith Jehovah of hosts concerning the pillars and concerning the sea and concerning the bases and concerning the residue of the vessels that are left in the city, which Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon took not, when he carried away captive Jeconiah the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from Jerusalem to Babylon, and all the nobles of Judah. So what challenge does he basically present in that? Think about that for a minute, if I'm reading that right. What's he tell all those false prophets? Tell them to say that King Nebuchadnezzar won't come take the rest of it, right? So let him prophesy that and then see what happens. See if that comes true. See if that'll hold true. If they really are prophets. Notice verse 18. Hearken not unto them, speaking of the false prophets, and serve the king of Babylon instead. Wherefore should this city become a desolation? But if they be prophets, if they're really prophets, okay, if they're really, then let the word of Jehovah be with them. Let them now make intercession to Jehovah of hosts that the vessels which are left in the house of Jehovah and in the house of the king of Judah and at Jerusalem go not into Babylon. If they want to be real prophets for God, then let them start saying things like, spare this city from the rest of the desolation that Nebuchadnezzar is bringing. Let them start prophesying things like, let's become servants of Babylon and so that the rest of our prized possessions won't get carried off. Let them start speaking the truth about things. Or let them speak falsely and see which way happens here when Nebuchadnezzar continues to come. They've got a choice to make. They can either continue to spread their lies and create greater desolation and greater spoils being taken back to Babylon, or they can preach the message of servitude and spare some of those things that are still left in Jerusalem that haven't been taken yet. The challenge is set before them, and they've got to make a decision of which way they want to go. Keep telling people lies, which isn't helping anybody, or begin to try to get the people to accept what God has said. So basically, if you go back to your questions then, what was the message of the false prophets? All those vessels and things that we're taking will come back when? Shortly. Okay? And what should the people do to live? And again, they got to serve Babylon. And what would happen? Let's read on. We got a couple more verses I should have read before we did this. Verse 21, Yea, thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that are left in the house of Jehovah, and in the house of the king of Judah, and at Jerusalem, they shall be carried to Babylon, and there shall they be until the day that I visit them, saith Jehovah. Then will I bring them up and restore them to this place. So it's all what? God says it's all going to be taken. It's all going back. And in whose time? In His time. Okay, the prophets were saying, it's going to be a short period of time. It'll all come back. You know, don't use that as proof of anything. Doesn't really mean anything. And so they convinced the people of all these lies. God says they are going to be carried away, and they're only coming back when I decide they're coming back. And in His time, He'll restore them at His decision making. So you've got this similar theme that continues throughout the book. You got two sets of prophets. And Jeremiah is not completely alone. He feels alone a lot, but there are others like him that are trying to convince the people to do the right thing through these things. And then you've got a host of false prophets who are acting as though this will never happen. Quit fretting over it. Don't worry about it. All's well, all's well, all is well. And it's not. And so the judgment is very firmly on its way in relationship to Babylon. Any thoughts about the text itself? Questions or things we might have about the text? All right, let's go back in our last 5 minutes then and answer the question that we end every lesson with. So what do you see in this chapter? This is a little more hard. This is a more difficult chapter for me to extract a lot of principle for us to talk about. But what did you see? Did you see any lessons, things that you thought of that might be poignant for us today? Go ahead, Roger. Yeah. Right. Or what had been read to them from the law, if they'd had an opportunity. But they were much, and we talked about that a little bit last week, they were very much dependent upon others, at least reading to them what the law said. And I think you're right. If they are still personally accountable in a time period where they're having to trust others to read and share the message with them, how much more accountable am I in a day where at any point in time in the day I can sit down and pick up my Bible and know what God wants from me? And so there is certainly throughout the whole book, but in this passage as well, a message of what we'll simply call accountability that we have to appreciate. Anything else you notice? Go ahead, Randy.
Reading 2 Timothy 4:2-4, preach the word, be in the season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. The time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap for themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away from the ears of truth and shall be turned into tables.
Yeah.
So we face the same thing in our lives.
Yeah.
We don't want to listen, but we need to still preach.
Yeah. That is one of the things I've noticed about the whole book. We almost tend to think of almost being two completely different kind of eras, for lack of a better description. But the basic challenges and problems haven't changed a bit. You either you listen and gain the benefit, you listen to God and appreciate what He has to say and gain the benefit, or you reject it. And we live, and he lived in a time where the vast majority of people didn't want to listen to what, and we've got to be long-suffering and patient, but presenting the doctrine and teachings of Jesus, in even when it may not be as readily accepted as we'd like it to. Yeah, right. Any other thoughts? Yeah. We have to be careful. And I want to be, because I don't want to give the impression that we need to, look around, just wonder, trying to figure out who's the false prophet among us. I'm not trying to imply that, but we do have to be careful of who is and examine. We don't have the same kinds. We don't have prophets. Number one, okay. We're not prophets. You don't have any prophets. I mean, if you want to talk about it in a generic definition of a prophet being a messenger, okay, I'll embrace that. But we don't have anybody that's bringing new information. We don't have anybody that's giving direct information that's coming from God. So the testing of a prophet is not the same. But the truth is, we do need to be paying attention and being careful about what people are saying to us, especially religiously or scripturally. And be sure that what we're hearing is true, and the motivation behind what they're saying, and be cautious about those things, because some folks may not even be trying to mislead me; they just may be mistaken, and so we have to listen carefully for their benefit as well. Anything else you noted? Yeah. And study to show yourself approved unto who? Unto God. Okay. At the end of the day, I want to have His approval, and I want to make sure that as I listen to what I'm hearing, what people are saying about Him and His book, that I get my book out and make sure that I'm hearing accurate things. Okay. Lord willing, then we'll come back Wednesday evening. And I'm going to try to prep 28 and 29. Prep them both. Do both 28 and 29 for Wednesday evening. Got 17 verses in chapter 28, so I think that we can probably cover both chapters. Again, we're at the point in the book where we're talking about the very same things. We're not really getting a lot of new information in terms of things to discuss. But so we'll cover both chapters 28 and 29.